Hey everyone, welcome back to OMC Built. Today I'm going to start a new project. This series will probably be about 3 or 4 episodes long. I'll start off with a quick introduction to the project and then we'll get started on some fabrication. So this is a 1996 Toyota 4Runner. It was a good friend of mine, Keith. He had it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. He took very good care of it. Did a lot of the maintenance that is required around the 150,000 mile mark. And then another friend of mine, Devin, bought it from him. He had it for a year or two, and then it wound up in my hands. And unfortunately, there was an encounter with a deer, but fortunately, I wasn't going to use the front bumper or grill anyways. So what today's project is going to be is we are going to remove the factory bumper, strip everything down, and we are going to build, I guess what I'd call a pre-runner style tubular front bumper for this. So we're going to have a skid plate. We're going to make some mounts to mount up the factory turn signals again. I'm not going to go too crazy and get any aftermarket stuff for that. I do have a couple 5-inch Hella projector fog lights that I'm going to put where the grill used to be, and I have a couple LED light bars that I might put into the mix, but I'm not sure. Don't really have a plan. I'm just going to freestyle it, start chopping things up, start bending some tubing, and we'll see what happens. That'll be today's project for episode 1, and for episode 2 we're going to make some I guess I'd call them rock crawler sides, something to kind of step on to get in the vehicle, which really isn't necessary. It's only got a 2-inch lift on it, but you know, make some tubing sides for it. That'll be episode 2, and then episode 3 I think we're gonna make a tubular rear bumper and do a spare tire mount that swings out. Then I think for episode 4 we'll do a few smaller projects, like I want to make a rack for the top of it. Nothing too fancy, but when I go out to like the mountain bike trails or something, I'd like to be able to hop up there and hang out between laps at the course, and of course, you know, store some coolers and tents and whatever else up there when I go camping. And I got some wheels for it. I just got to order up some tires, so you'll see those in a later episode. Does have a little rust here and there. I've gone through and fixed some things already. It had a drain on the battery that was causing the battery to drain overnight. That happened to be one of the switches for the dome light, so I just disconnected it instead of fixing it. Doesn't really matter to me. The rear hatch latch is broken, so I got one on eBay coming in and we'll replace that. Driver's door opened and closed pretty rough. The little latch down here was kind of in the wrong position, and you can see that it had been hitting the bottom here, and so it's closing really rough and opening even rougher. So did my favorite thing and took a hammer to this, repositioned it so that the door closes real nicely now. We're going to get started on the front bumper today. First thing I'm going to do is remove this old front bumper. Then this got all bent up in the crash with the deer, so that I am just going to cut off and grind off. Like I said, I'm not really going to do much planning. I'm just going to freestyle it. As any maintenance comes up, we'll take care of it, but there's not too big of aspirations for this thing. I mean, it's got 192,000 miles on it, but like I said, a lot of the good maintenance has been done, and it's not too rusty, so it should treat me pretty well. I have a Subaru wagon with winter tires that I drive in the winter here in Minnesota, so this will really just be a summer vehicle. You know, if I really end up enjoying this 4Runner, I'll probably get a much nicer one probably still a third generation. The third generation's really my favorite. But so maybe this will end up being a test bed for a future project. But why don't we get started unbolting some bumpers and cutting some metal. Alright, so here is the plan now that we have the front bumper off. I'm going to take off the factory skid plate, cut off this little cross member here and clean that up. Then we are going to start bending some tubes. The first one we're going to bend is going to be an 1 3/4 inch tube. That's going to go underneath the headlight here and wrap around. That's going to follow the body line as best I can. There will be one bend right here, another bend right in here, same on the other side, so there'll be 4 bends. And then from this tube, I'm going to bend a smaller diameter tube, maybe 1.5 inches. I might go even smaller, up and around and back down. And then there'll be the 2 hella lights in there. And I think I might put a piece of mesh behind that just to kind of fill it in. At a minimum, I'll spray paint all this black afterwards so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. We got to clean up the edge of the headlight buckets here. That one already broke off, but we'll shave that smooth. We'll trim this one off, clean that up. Then once we get that top tube bent up, we'll figure out how we're going to attach it to the chassis. It'll probably just come right down to the top of this right here. Then I think we will bend up a lower bar that'll come down and up. Then there'll be some tubes coming down from the side attaching, and then some more tubes from this top bar to this bottom bar coming down. And then there'll be a skid plate there that will I guess that's not really going to be a skid plate, more of a brush guard, I suppose, because it's not going to be under the car. But like I said, there's going to be a lot of freestyling. I've only really done one of these style of bumpers before, but I've done a whole bunch of what we call bash bars on drift cars, and I've built about, I don't know, like 27 or 28 roll cages, so I'm very familiar with bending tubes and all that. And so like I said, I'm just going to start rolling with it and see what happens. So I'm going to get out the grinder, start prepping some stuff, and then it'll be time to whip out the Mittler Brothers tubing bender and start taking some measurements and see what happens. This video is not really intended to be a how-to necessarily, but I will kind of guide through the step-by-steps, and of course if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I always answer them. So thanks for watching. so I finally have everything trimmed up, cut off, prepped, ready to go. And you just saw me cut the 1 3/4 tube to length for the top tube. I measured it at 84 inches, added 2 inches to it, cut it at 86. Why not? Can always cut a little more off the end to get it to fit perfect right at the edge of the fender there. I know that, you know, when you bend tubing, it actually stretches, it grows. Just to be safe, why not add an extra inch on each side? So now what I'm going to do is use one of my favorite tools for tubing, this Mittler Brothers bend protractor. They come in different radiuses to match the dies that you have. It just, I'll show you here, you can use it to calculate the bend you want. So let's eyeball this up. What we're going to do is get the side on this fender parallel, and then we're going to square up the side on the headlight, and that will tell us the bend here. So this will be a little awkward, bear with me. I need a little more. Let's get this side square. Of course, from this camera angle, it might not look like it is good to go, but let me set this to 50, and we'll see if 50 degrees is looking like the bend we want. Now, the tube's not going to stick out this far. I'm just using this as a guide here. There's a bunch of crap underneath there, so I can't really get the thing too square, but maybe this will help out a little bit. So, fender side, oh shit, I'm not even pointing this thing in the right direction. So the fender side is parallel, and the front side is parallel as well. So it looks like the bends are going to be 50 degrees. So our tube is going to look like and this is probably horrible. I have vend here, vend here, vend here, and vend here. These vends are going to be equal, as are these ones. And so this we just calculated to be 50 degrees. And let's check and see what the other bend is going to be. That bend is going to be pretty shallow. We just want between the headlights to be square. And so why don't we go and measure that. This one, I think I can get the protractor in there a little bit better. So you can see we make this parallel and then square up the other side. Sorry guys, this is horrible footage. And make this guy square. I'm going to try to use the bottom of the radiator as a little bit of a guide. The hood is curved, but I can kind of use that. And then I can also get down here, line that up so that we're good there, and then get that guy pointed right at the other one. So, looks like that's going to be right about 16 degrees. Now, with the tubing bender, it's really easy to bend more. It's harder to bend less. You basically need to wedge it underneath something and put your weight on it and kind of bounce it around, and you can relax a bend a few degrees if you want, but then you're fighting with keeping everything equal. The other thing you really want to consider when you have a bar like this that is bent 4 times is you need to make sure the two ends are parallel to each other and not twisting in different directions, because that will kind of mess up everything that's attached to it, you know. So if it is out of square, the left side lateral tube that goes down to the frame rail will be, you know, maybe a 1/2 inch shorter than the other side, and most people won't ever notice it, but when something's really nice and square, it just looks right. So I'll spend the extra time getting that squared away. So let me mark this here. Whoa! Alright, so we're going to do 16 degrees on the inner ones, 50 on the outer. Now, tube bending is one of those things where I've met a lot of people that do it differently. There's a lot of right ways to do it. There's not just one. Whatever works for you is what you should do. For me, I'm going to treat this like a main hoop of a roll cage. And so I'm going to bend the smaller inner bends first, and that way we can hold the pipe up to the front. I said pipe, it's really a tube. We can hold the tube up to the front and make sure those angles are exactly what we want. If they're a little shy, we can bump it up just a bit more, get that perfectly where we want it to, and then we can figure out the distance between the bends so that the steeper bend on the outside wraps around the headlight and fender and does so in an even way, so there's an even gap around the whole thing. Just look a little goofy otherwise, I think. And these fender flares don't stick out a whole lot, so I think we're going to try to put about the center line of the tube with the edge of the fender and the little headlight trim piece there. And so the next step is going to be to measure the distance we want between our bends. I want the bend to be fully finished by the time it reaches this point right here. So the bend is going to be somewhere in this point. I'm going to measure the whole distance and then take, let's see, I'll take off probably 2 inches on each side. So take off 4 total inches, and that will be where our bends start. And since they're shallow bends, they're really only going to take up maybe that 2 inches of tube. So the end of the bend will be right there. The other good thing about the bend protractor is if you're using a 6-inch radius protractor and a 6-inch radius die, this actually shows you your bend start and your bend end and shows you the length of that bend. So this is right about 1 3/4 inches. So like I said, if I take 2 inches off each side, then I'll make sure that the end of the bend lines up where I want it to. So I'm going to take that measurement, I'm going to break out the tubing bender, and we'll start rolling some tube. Alright, so the total distance is 35 inches. I'm going to take 4 off. We're going to call it 31 inches between the bends. I'm going to do a little thinking here. Now, it's also something to think about. The stubs that come out for the frame, measure those on center. Those are 29 1/4. So that is going to be narrower than where my bend starts are, and that's good because just for aesthetic reasons, I think it would be nice to have the tubes that come down and connect this be generally up and down. Definitely don't want them to go inwards. I just don't think that would look right. Although, you know, you could argue that it matches the curve of the headlight there, but we're going to have a tube that goes up and fills in this whole space. So we kind of want these to be vertical, or if anything, kind of going a little bit away from each other. So I think 31 inches between the bends is going to look proper. That's what we're going to stick with. So I'll mark that here. 31 inches between the bends. And now let's transfer that to our tube. Alright. So let me bring this over here. Got what's going on this table here. So let's remeasure our total length of the pipe. I called it a pipe again, it's a tube. There is a difference. 86 on the nose. Alright, so we're going to take our total length of 86. Where'd my marker go? We're going to take the total length, 86. We're going to subtract that by the 31 on the center, that's going to be 55 inches, okay? Now, divide that by 2, and we get, let's see, we get 27.5. Let me double check that in my mind. 25, 50, add the 2.5 by 2, 5. So if we measure in from each end 27.5 inches, that will give us our 31 inches on center. I always measure from the edges in. That way, if you basically will never mess up, because if you make the first bends like an inch or 2 or 3 off center, then you might wind up with a big problem and one of the sides is too short. Even if you cut the other side, it's just going to look goofy. So I always do a little bit of math, and then I measure in from the edges. Like I said, that way things remain square. So we're going to measure 27.5 in from the end. Make a little mark with the marker here. Then measure 27.5 in from this edge. We're going to make a little mark, the marker right there. Now, always verify. It's easy to make mistakes doing math. So, there we go. Boom, 31 on the nose. We want 31 degrees between our bends. Now, another thing you need to make sure of is which direction you're going to bend. This is going to be the bend start, so the bend is going to go in that direction and in this direction. If you start bending and you put it in your die the wrong way and you bend towards the inside, that bend, like we said, is about going to take up 1 3/4 inches of tubing. So now you just made that 31 inches about 28, and that's going to affect the whole look of everything and any other measurements you've already taken. So we know that this is 31 degrees, 31 inches. And so now, a little trick I like, everyone always has a tape measure that at some point won't roll back up. It gets stuck, it's a pain in the ass, you end up throwing it away, maybe you keep it around for a long time, it gets worse and worse until finally you give it a hook. I like to cut off about 18 inches of it. This works nice in like little tight places to take measurements, but more so, you can wrap it around the tube and you can make a mark around the whole circumference. Now the two bends are going to be opposite, meaning that you're going to mark the tube on the one side and then you want to make a mark 180 degrees on the other side. You can just make a little mark, flip the tube over, make a little mark. I like making a mark around the whole circumference of the tube. It's just a good habit to get into. So, I'll show you how this kind of works here. Just take it, flip it face side down, wrap it around the tube, squeeze it together. It's kind of like those old bracelets. You know, those old bracelets you used to whip on your wrist? I don't know, maybe that dates me. Maybe I'm a lot older than some of you guys. But now I can mark it. And we can go most of the way around the tube. And then we can finish off the rest. Line it back up, square it up, make that mark. Now usually, I like to be real precise and use a tungsten scribe, but I haven't been out in the garage for months, really, and I don't know where the heck it went. I've been looking all over, whatever. A marker works, it's accurate enough. So you can see there's the mark we just made. It's nice, it's all the way around. Let's make the mark on the other side here. We'll find where we made the little dot there, and you want to get, see, this isn't going to work right here. See, that's not going to work. You want to get these two parts parallel, squeeze it together, take out all the slop, kind of wiggle it around just a little bit so it really seats itself square, and then you can make your mark. So now I'll rotate the tube, make another mark, a third of the way around or so, and finally finish it up. I got a little lazy, so it's not absolutely perfect. But for what we're doing, it's going to work out pretty nice. So now we can make our first bends. So what I got here is a Mittler Brothers 90-degree tubing bender. Love Mittler Brothers. Made in the USA. I think they're out of Michigan. I certainly paid full price for this stuff. No one's given me anything. I've had this thing maybe for 10 years. I've done, at last count, I think I've done like 20, well, I've done like 27 or 28 roll cages, something like that. With this machine, I've done probably, I don't know, 18 full roll cages, a whole bunch of bash bars and other tubing work on race cars. It's always treated me well. There is limitations to it. It only bends 90 degrees. For motorsports applications, I mean, when do you really need to bend more than 90 degrees? You know, there's a few scenarios, but you can always get away with this. I've used Bailey, I've used Pro Tools, I've used JD Squared, I've used, you name it, basically, JMR. I've used almost every bender that's out there that you'll find. And this makes the best bends. It's almost like a mandrel bender. There's no crimping whatsoever. There's no distortion. Lots of the other common tube benders actually really ovalize the tube, and some of them actually create almost a peak on the top of the bend. And you know, especially in like a roll cage, you want as little bends as you can get away with, because bends are a weak point, and you want those bends to stay true. You don't want them to change shape during the bending process. That will weaken the tube. So this tubing bender, it has a big ram on it. It can bend really thick, really big tubing and pipe. And the other thing about this is it's portable. You know, a lot of other ones, sure, they're portable too, but this thing packs up real nice and tight, and you can use it on a table, you can use it on the floor, you can tip it up on the tips, which is what I usually do when you're squaring up a tube with multiple bends like this. You'll see in a little bit. It really helps you keep everything square, and it's just a really nice piece of equipment. If I could do it again, I would probably get this bender, or if I had the money, I'd go for their 180-degree bender, but that's, you know, 3 or 4 times the price of this. Dies for this are a little bit more expensive than other brands, I believe, but these are aluminum. They're lighter if you're moving stuff around. You know, if you're going to people's places and building them, you know, tube structures, doing it that way, it's certainly a lot nicer. It's a lot easier on me with a bad back moving this thing around. So enough gabbing about this. Let's start doing some bending. So we'll line up our first bend here. Now, let's stick the tube. And remember, we want to be very specific about where the first bend is going to start. Now, this might not be the most ideal to do it on this table. I've never done it on this table before, but we'll make it happen. So, we have our 2 marks, 31 degrees between center. We don't want to just chuck this up and start bending, because we're going to place the bend on the inside. We want the bend to go to the outside. So we go to the far one, push that die all the way back. We'll line up our mark that we made. We put on the saddle clamp. Put the pin in. Make sure the pin is all the way through on this bender. Other benders have different ways of attaching the tube. But you can see, there we are. There's our first bend. Now we're going to bend to 16 degrees. So whenever you're bending tube, there's some spring back. You always have to bend more than what you want. If you want 16 degrees, maybe you got to bend 17, maybe you got to bend 18. and the tube will spring back after that. When I used to do cages more, I kept a spreadsheet, and I used a piece of scrap. Most of the cages I do are 1 5/8 095 wall. So I took a piece of that scrap and I bent it to 10, 15, 20, 30, and on. And I measured what I bent it to 30 degrees on the protractor, and then I measured what it sprung back to. I created a spreadsheet, and then I was able to do a formula that filled everything in. So if I wanted to, nail a 52-degree bend, I would look up on my table that I created, and I'd have to do 57.5 or something like that. Now, every diameter of tube and every thickness of tube is going to be different, but if you're doing a lot of tubing, that's the way to do it. And you can also create tables for the growth, but for how much the tube grows while you're bending it. But even if the tube's like $4 a foot, it's worth it just to leave a couple extra inches off and have to cut that than precisely cutting an 82 1/4 tube. With your growth calculated, why not just cut it to 86 or 88, do your bends, cut off the excess. That's how I always do it. So this thing's good to go now. It's all locked in. We're going to slide the die up, not tight against the saddle, but we're going to slide it up, and we're going to hit, my compressor's probably going to turn on, so I might not be able to talk, but we're going to take all the slack out of this, and then we're going to start bending. We have our bend protractor set. We can slide it in here, and we can keep track of where we're bending. We can basically take it and make it parallel. That's another thing I really like about this bender, is this follow block. You can make sure that it's square to this, and then you bend your tube to the other leg over here. And since this is a shallow bend, there's not that much spring back. If you're doing like a 60-degree bend, there's quite a bit more spring back. So first we're gonna pull the tube up so that the die here is resting on the table. Oh, nice. Good timing. So now we have this thing dead nuts at 16 degrees. I have it parallel with the follow block here, and if I look straight down, it's parallel with the tube. Now, like I said, there's going to be some spring back. So I'm going to set this to 18 degrees, just about 18 degrees here, and I'm going to bend it to that. And I'm going to bend both of them to this 18 degrees on the protractor, and then we'll go over to the vehicle and we'll hold it up and we'll see how we are looking. So let's bump this just a little bit more. Of course, watch your fingers. You will lose a finger with this thing very easily if you run it into the die. If you don't lose it, you'll have one gross looking finger. So don't be dumb. Don't blame me. Take responsibility for yourself. Now what I can do is I can slide my bend protractor back on the follow block so that the other leg is on top of the tube. Before it was kind of on the edge, so I could look at it. but now I can look straight down on top, and it is perfect. So, before I let all the tension out, what I'm going to do, I'm going to find a better marker than I'm using, hopefully. I got these bunch of Sharpies that suck. Let's see if this one is any good here. Okay, so I got a nice new Sharpie. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the die. This, if I do end up needing to bend more, this way I can line it back up perfect. When it's this shallow of a bend, it's kind of arbitrary. So this mark right here, I'll be able to line that right back up with the die, tighten the clamp, and I'll know that I'm not twisting that bend. The other thing I'm going to do is mark along the guide bar. This is going to mark, let's call it the tangent. I don't know my terms. I just go with the flow. This is the top of the tube. Now when we make our second bend, we can reline this up, and we'll know that the first bend and the second bend are on the same plane and there's no twist. So all you really got to do is nail the first two bends and make sure that there's no twist between them, and then you're good to go. That's another reason why I really love this bender. You start figuring out the little stuff like that, and man, it saves a lot of time. All right, so now we're going to relieve the pressure here. Release the saddle. Take out the pin. Remove the die. And let's take the tube out, kind of set it back up here, and out of curiosity, I'm just going to see how much it has shrank. So line up this leg. You kind of want to get the, so you line up your 0 right here with your bend start, and then you square that leg up. Get that thing square, and then you can see. So that is definitely a little bit shyer. I can undo that there, and let's see exactly what it is. Let me get this square again. And so this is, it looks like, that is just shy. Well, nope, I'm not even at 16. So let's get this square. So that is, boom, that is right at 16. So let's set this back to 18, and we'll bend the other side. Now, another rad thing about this bender is it's reversible. So you can take out this die, and you can flip it, and then you can bend the tube that way. There's certain situations where that comes in so handy. For this, it doesn't really matter. I can just take this tube, flip it around, and then we'll be bending towards the outside of the bend once again. So, let's get this thing squared up in the saddle, tightened up, and then we'll have to make sure that these bends are going to be on the same plane. That's the most important thing. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to take, so we got everything set here, I'm going to take some slack out of this so that it holds the tube a little bit better. That'll make it a lot easier to set the twist. We don't want to do it enough that it's going to start bending. We just want to put a little light pressure on it. There we go. You can see it's tight in the machine. Now we want to make sure that this bend is going to be on the same plane as the other bend. You don't want this running downhill or uphill. Now, I've used digital levels. If you don't have one of these, you need one. These little Wixies. Turn them on, set them on a surface. This is on the same surface as the table. You zero it out, and then you can get your level off of there, or you can level it off of the actual die in the bender. These are great. I've actually had more success with my eyeballs. So that's what I'm just going to do now. I'm just going to eyeball this thing. So I'm going to look at the bend, and you can line it up with the saddle, and then you can look across the machine and you can give this a twist. Now I'm going to loosen the saddle just a little bit. That should allow me to give this a twist if I need. Yup. And so I'm going to hold it so that the die is on the ground. You can kind of see it's moving. I'm going to hold it so that it's square. And I'm going to look. Another thing you can do is look on this side, and then you can see the part of the, it's called the horseshoe die, I don't know, the part of the main die, not the follow block. And you can look down the tube, this part of the tube, and square that up with the saddle that's on there, and then use this to line it up with the center line of the entire machine. So this is still running downhill. We're going to bend it up a little bit here, give it a little twist. Now, that's looking pretty good. But pretty good is not good enough for your first set of bends. You need to get this as good as you can. Otherwise, like they say, shit runs downhill. So, do the best that you can do now, and you will thank yourself later. Look at it from a lot of different directions. A lot of angles, a lot of different directions. Get that thing as square as you can. I really like how it is. We're going to go with this. So I'm going to tighten that saddle back up just a bit, and we will start making this bend. So this bend is done now. Before we relieve the tension, we are going to make our marks so that if we need to re-bend this, add a little more bend to it, we can. We're also going to mark along the follow block so that we can get the second set of bends in the same plane. Now, the other thing that's really awesome about this tubing bender, and I forgot because I haven't used this thing in a long time, is it has this little bar here, and there's a ruler along the top. But that's not very accurate, but what you can do is use a small little ruler like this. I usually I have another one that reads all the way down to 30 seconds, but you measure it from this surface to the edge of that, and this is right at, let's see, 1.5, 1 5/8. So this is 1 11/16. So I'm going to write that on the tube near the bend so that if we need to bend this a little bit more, we know we have the line here so we can line it back up in the die with the saddle. And we have this line here so we can double check to make sure the twist is right. And if we need to add a little bend, we know that our last bend was 1 11/16. So we can add just another 32nd or another 16ths onto that to add more to that bend, and that way we can get both bends equal. We will relieve the pressure on this. Take the saddle off here. And oy vey! Yay! And now we have our tube with our first bends. So we can do some confirmation here. This is not a very accurate way, but just to show you, you can measure from the end to the center of the tube where our mark is, 27.5. Check and make sure this one is equal. 27.5. Now, let's go fit it up to the 4Runner. Let's see how our bends look. Hopefully we got it right the first time. It's always best to get it right the first time. So let's hold her up. Like I said, the tube is going to be, the top of the tube is, I want to be on the edge of the headlights here. And it looks like this is perfect. Now, what we are going to do is figure out where our second set of bends are. So I'm going to take this bend protractor, I'm going to lay it over top here. We're going to set it to what the actual is. So we'll get that square, we'll move that down. So it looks like we ended up with 16. So there is our bend start. We want to accurately mark our bend end. So that way, and it actually shows, let's see here. You can tell that the actual bend end is a little further along. For it does, you know, any bender is going to leave a little bit of a, not really a crimp, just like a thins it out, especially on the inside. But at least this way we can have square marks to start from. So we'll get that zeroed out and we'll mark this guy. So now we have two marks there. Let's take a tape measure and let's double check. That's going to be 25 5/8. We'll check the other one here. 25 5/8. So, with 31 inches between, I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to use some tape just to span the distance so I can make a mark and figure out where our next bends are. So we're going to put a piece of tape here. Hopefully it sticks to this filthy car. Maybe it'll get washed sometime. Maybe it won't. Alright, so now, so the distance between here and here was 35. We want to take 2 inches off of each side. That was going to be the start of our bend. So we're going to mark that. So this doesn't have to be, you know, down to a 16th, but the better you get it, the better it'll turn out. So now we have our marks. This should be 31 on center, or 31 between the bend here. Yep. Just a little bit longer. And we figured this is 1 3/4 beyond that for these marks. So really what we can do is we'll just measure that 1 3/4. This is kind of nitpicky stuff, but it works. Take this, we'll mark this. Alright, so now we know the other bend was going to be 50 degrees. We're going to set our bend protractor to 50 degrees. We're going to hold it up here. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of stuff in the way. but we can kind of see this side works a little bit better. You can kind of get it up in there, and we can see where we want the bend start and finish to make. Now this is a 6-inch protractor. My die for my 1 3/4 is actually 8 inches. Most of the stuff I do is 1 5/8 and 1 1/2, and that I have a 6-inch radius for. These are pretty expensive, so all you just have to figure out is an 8-inch radius is gonna obviously make the pipe so that it's a little more outboard. So you just take a little extra distance off of your measurement here. So I'm actually going to put some more tape up so I can make a mark where the bend start is going to be, and then we'll measure the distance between it. So let's get this guy under there. That is going to put it pretty good. I want it to be a little more inboard. So this is where the bend start is going to be, right here. But like I said, the tubing is actually going to be a little more outward than this. So this is actual. We are going to want to go on a bend like this, maybe an inch further in. Let's call it right here. All right. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Aimed the right way. All right, so distance between the next bends is 7 7/8. So what I'm going to do is mark that on the tube now. So the first one we're going to just mark with our tape here, and that'll be 7 7/8. That bastard's not going to stay. Let me get on this side of it. Hold it there. So right there, get it lined up pretty good. 7 7/8. You son of a gun. All right. That's going to be right here. That's where our next bend is going to start. All right. So now, to keep things even, we're going to measure in from the end, and that is just shy of 17 3/4. So we'll go to the other side, and we'll measure 17 3/4, just shy, just on the inside of that. But you can see on this side, there's no line because we flipped it over. So I'm actually going to not trust doing the wraparound technique exactly. Instead, we have this follow line. We're going to mark 17 3/4 shy on the correct side of the tube now. That will keep things extra squaw. There we go. There's our next bend starts. Now, one thing to always consider too is that tubing benders, and all tubing benders are a little different. This one has the big follow block. That's going to be our bend start, and our bend end is going to be 5 1/4 inches away. So 5 1/4. We're looking at the bend end is going to be right here. So we only have this much tube left to use as leverage, right? So if you only have 4, 5, 6 inches of tube, you're not going to be able to complete that bend because of the way the machine is designed. So we're going to be fine here, but just barely. And maybe you'll see what I mean when we start bending. So let's go over to the machine and let's start bending. Another thing is, like I said, the tube springs back, right? So last time we wanted 16 degrees, we bent it at 18. We added 2 degrees. This is going to be 3 times the bend plus a little more. So if we want 50, we should probably bend to at least 55. Now I'm going to do it to 54 because, like I said, it's really hard to unbend a tube. It's really easy to add a little more bend. So let's go back to the bender and we will bend these legs out and we'll see how she fits. Alright, let's get this guy mounted up. It's going to be a little more cumbersome now because the weight of the tube is going to try to tip the machine over, but we will get saddle in, we will get that lined up. We are going to slide the follow bar up a bit, take the slack out like we've been doing. Alright, now the slack is all out. So now you can see the line that we made previously. We want to line that back up. Take into account the fact that the Sharpie can't get it right along the edge. But there we go. Now we'll tighten the saddle back up. And you're going to want to double check just to make sure we are looking really good. So we're gonna start making the bend. Alright, so we got this thing nailed at 55 degrees, which was my guesstimate for how much we need to bend it for the spring back. I'm going to mark this tube like we've been marking, because this one we very well might need to bend again. We're going to mark this. I'm going to mark it all along the die here, as much as I can. We're going to mark it along the follow block here. Make a new mark, because the old one is buried back in here. And then we're going to measure the distance, like I showed you over here. That is, well, let's get the 32nd one out, see how accurate we can really get. That is too accurate for me. So, this is 3 5/8 long, so let's just bump it to the next line. Right there. So that is 3 11/16. So we're going to write that down. That's what we're going to bend the next one to, so we don't have to eyeball it with the bend protractor. That will make both bends even. So I said that's 3 11/16. Double check that measurement so I don't screw up at this point. That's 3 1/2 plus an 8 plus 3/16. So that is 3 11/16. 3 5/8 plus a 16th. So now we can let go of the pressure. Take the saddle off. Let the die go all the way back into the machine. We will flip the tube. It's getting cumbersome. We will get the saddle back on, line up our start line. The last one I buried just a little bit, or it wasn't sticking out, it was even with the start line. So now put the slide the follow block back forward. Take out the slack. That's the slack pretty much gone, maybe one more pump. And looks like we need to do a little twist here. I'm gonna say that. Tighten up this. Give her a look-see. All right, that's looking good. Let's start the bend. One more 16. There it is. Now we make our marks. And now let's release the pressure. Saddle off here. Whoa, take it easy. And we'll put this on the table. And neither of the ends wobble, so it looks like we got it pretty square. Table isn't exactly, you know, it's not like it's Blanchard ground or anything like that, but square enough for what we are looking for. Now I want to take the bend protractor real quick and see what our actual angle was. We were trying to get 50 degrees, we bent it to 50, or we bent it to 55, trying to get 50, so let's get this all nice and square, and that looks like we're pretty damn close. Maybe a ½ degree shy, but let's set the camera up here and let's see how we did. Take this off, not needed anymore. Let's hold this up, let's see how we did. Now, I can't really see what the heck's going on, so let me get a couple of helping hands here. I don't know if this is going to be too tall for what we want. See if I can make it short enough. Yeah, it's got to look pretty damn good. Use that right there. I got another one. I built these out of some steel from the steel place I go to. They turn out super handy. Let's get these things the same height here. I use one for my table, one for my bandsaw. They come in real handy at a time like this. So I can get these guys in there. Let's see, is this one going to be, what are we hitting on there? Dun, 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 dun. It's got to go this way a little bit. Bring this down just a smidgen. So I can get that in there. Let's see, how's this? Get that over just a bit. Alright, what do you guys think? It's pretty parallel there, pretty parallel there. Looks, if you look at the frame rail ends, it is square to the chassis. Nice and parallel, nice and parallel. This sticks out that little extra bit than this. This is kind of on the center line of the tube. This is stuck out just a little bit. I actually kind of like how that turned out. I should, when I took an inch off of this measurement for between there, I should have maybe only taken a ½ inch and then it would have been even. But I think it's going to work out pretty damn good because that'll add some shape to it really. The top tube is going to come, looks like it's going to come right off of the bend here and come up and be leaned back just a little bit. And so that's where the tube that goes down to the frame rails is also going to be, so that line continues on, kind of adds a nice flow. So that'll come down. There'll also be a little bash guard down here for anything, so that will kind of be, you know, one big square there, rectangle, I guess. That'll look really good. We'll mount 2 Hellas in the middle here, paint all that stuff flat black so you can't see it. Maybe I'll make a little bead rolled mesh grill. And you can see I left these guys a little bit long. I could grab these tips in the saddle just right at the end and bend into this. And maybe I'll do that. And then, so bend up to about here, and then I can do a little slash cut that's on the radius of the fender there. I think that will look super good. And then we will have a bar that comes from this bend area, maybe from that bend, wrap down around, mount to the side of this. Then, like I said, we'll have our one tube come down. This will come back towards the chassis a little bit, and then the other one will come back even more, and that will give me an area to put another set of tubes that come inwards, and I'll put a nice aluminum dimple dyed panel in there that wraps down. So I think this turned out pretty good.